is a Betty Sawyer is a longtime resident of Utah, having moved to the state after graduating from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland in 1975 with a bachelor's in physical education. She earned a second bachelor's in physical therapy and her master's degree in public administration from the University of Utah. As a community and social justice advocate, Betty has been at the forefront of many initiatives in Utah to address education, community and economic development, culture, and health. As director of the Governor's Office of Black Affairs, Betty worked to gain passage of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and the establishment of the Utah Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission. Betty worked with the legislature and Board of Regents to gain $1 million in funding to support a minority scholarship endowment and funding to develop several economic development initiatives, including Ethnic Young Achievers marketing and advertising program to bring conferences and conventions to Utah, and a minority and women internship program. She led the movement to have Juneteenth recognized as a state holiday and worked with Representative Sandra Hollins and Senator Alvin Jackson. HB 033 passed and was signed into law by Governor Herbert in 2016. Betty is a life member and serves as president of the Ogden branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, working to eliminate inequities and discrimination in education, employment, housing, and other private and public sector areas. She's co-founded a project. She's the co-founder of Project Success Coalition, Community Learning Center, a grassroots nonprofit focused on health disparities reduction, cultural arts, youth leadership, and advocacy. She is a charter member of Great Salt Lake Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and Ogden Diversity Commission, serves on the board of the Ogden Civic Action Network, Utah Cultural Alliance, and the U.S. Civil Rights Commission's State Advisory Committee. And with that, everyone, give her a warm welcome. And Betty, we're turning the time over to you. There's a silent. Oh, let me unmute it, Betty. Sorry, or ask you to.
So good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today, and thanks for the invitation. I had shared with Eric that second half of my bio was optional, but he chose to share that anyway, so thank you. And thank you to Mindy as well. Your song selection today was right on point, as the young folk would say. It was very powerful, and the messages were definitely in line to some of the things that we're seeing and feeling today in Utah and across the country. So thank you for sharing. As I was thinking about what to share today, I did select a topic around the time is always right to do what is right. That's one of those quotes by Dr. King that's often used as we continue our social justice and civil rights work across the country. And just give you a sense of where I am and where some of my colleagues are, family and friends, co-workers, as we navigate through these particular times that we're in now. I was thinking about some of our civil rights movement and efforts of the past, and thinking about James Meredith, who was a retired Army veteran who tried several times unsuccessfully to register to attend the Ole Miss. And finally, after probably 3 or 4 efforts to block his admissions, the Supreme Court ruled that the state had no legal bounds to keep him from entering that institution. So he became the first Black person to attend Ole Miss University. And there was a young journalist from Baltimore, Dorothy Gillum, at the time wrote an article in the paper calling it Mississippi Mood. And in that particular article, she titled it Hope and Fear. And she said that the hope is that the Meredith decision signals the coming of the light for all of us. However, the fear is that the inevitable changes will bring death, destruction, and repercussions. So today, I think myself, as well as many other Blacks, are finding ourselves at that crossroad of hope and fear, wondering which one of those emotions are going to lead our thinking, our actions, and how we're processing this information that we're having to deal with on a daily basis. Our Juneteenth theme this past year, which just ended, was United in Hope. And we selected that theme nationally as well to share what that real message of our ancestors have been, despite the fact that we were brought involuntarily to these shores 401 years ago in 1619, that throughout our experiences, our ancestors held on to the hope of a brighter day. They held on to the hope that when the Constitution was finally written, that the words of that Constitution would impact us and include us, even though it didn't include us at the time of the writing. And they held on to the hope that the sacrifices they were making was going to make life in this world a better place for their children and their children's children. So again, that's kind of where I am today as an eternal optimist, trying to hold on to hope, because I know that without that hope, we will give up, that we will stop working, we will stop paying attention, we will stop being moved, we will stop being shocked by some of the things that are going on, and that will keep us from doing that difficult work that freedom, justice, equity, and inclusion requires of all of us. And so just a little bit about my background. I heard someone say that they just moved back to Maryland, my birth home. And as a sixth grader during the summer, transitioning to high school, I came home from playing outside to find the principal of my elementary school and a couple of teachers in the living room speaking with my parents. And if you know anything about teachers coming to your home, that definitely wasn't a good sign for me. So I tried to avoid even going into the house and try to make my way up the stairs, but was immediately called into the living room to join in this conversation. And they had come to my home to ask my parents if they would allow me to be a part of this test case of integrating the local high school, which was in Worcester County, Maryland, on the Lower Eastern Shore, Pocomoke High. And my mother was a civil rights worker, PTA president, all of those things. So needless to say, she said, yes, we'll let Betty go and she can do this work. And I immediately, and for the next few months before school started, felt that my parents had betrayed me in not allowing me to follow in my siblings' footsteps and go to Worcester High School, which is an all-Black high school. colors black and gold, be in their marching band, play athletic sports, and all of the fun things that I dreamed that high school would bring. Instead, I was one of 10 students uh, who were standing on a corner waiting for a bus to take us to integrate the local high school. And this was 11 years after the historic Brown v. Board of Education decision. And so when we talk about all deliberate speed, uh, folk weren't trying to integrate the public school at that time, and definitely not on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. But we did, and although and gladly speaking, we didn't endure the same kinds of challenges and dogs and hoses that Meredith had to experience and other the Little Rock Nine trying to integrate their schools, but it was still a very traumatic experience for a 12-year-old to have to go through. Fortunately, I made it successfully through that phase of my life and learned a lot of lessons along the way. And one of those lessons is that it is always the right time to do what is right. And that's something that my parents believed in, allowing me to be one of that 10 group of students. And with that, I had to embrace those challenges and with the help of my family and friends, decide what I was going to stand for and what I was going to be about. Would I be willing to stand alone in those times of challenge and controversy, or would I back down and shrink? And there were times as a young student that I wanted to shrink. I wanted to give up. I wanted to throw my hands in because I couldn't understand why I was being treated the way I was being treated. You know, I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. I was studying hard and doing the work. And even in classes, I would get 4 pluses beside a B versus 1 minus beside an A, and didn't understand that. I didn't know you could get 4 pluses or 3 pluses or 2 pluses. You either got an A, B, or A minus, or B minus, or B plus, you know. And those were things that I had to come to grips and understand that they were the challenges of change. And so pushing through that and finding myself here in Utah feeling like I was stepping back in time, but more recently watching what we've all watched unfold on television with the deaths and murders of one more Black person at the hands of police. We've all had to grapple with a wide range, not just emotions, so fear, trauma, terror. I'm the mother of 4 sons, and so throughout my life, that's always been something that we've had to pay attention to, and lessons we've had to share with our sons about how to carry themselves, how to walk, how to talk, how to engage, to be safe and to make it home safely every day. And then to look back and find myself having to deal with all of those things again in 2020 has definitely made me wonder what keeps others from doing what is right when that time comes, when they're confronted with challenges as well as opportunities. A lot of questions have been asked about, you know, how do we undo 401 years of systematic racism and racial equality? And there are some that don't believe that that even exists, that is myth and hoax. And we've come a long way, and we hear often, I had nothing to do with it, or why don't you just, or why don't y'all just do A, B, and C, you know, that was so long ago. But as writer William Faulkner had talked about the past being the past, they said, is it really the past? And what we've seen lately is to show that our past is not really past. We're still in the midst of deciding how we're going to deal with that big question around race, which has been there. You know, the problem with the 20th century is a color line. And so we're still there today, unfortunately. But I still hold out hope that we can be better, that we can do things differently, and that we can once and for all come to grips with our history in this country, that we can come to grips with those things that need to be done by all of us, you know, to make a difference. And I believe we have the will to do that. When we look at our technological advances, our scientific advances, advancement in science and every other arena, when we put our mind to doing anything, we can achieve that. And that's what we tell our children as well. If you work hard enough, if you do what is right, you can expect certain outcomes. But unfortunately, that has not been a consistent legacy for myself and Black people in this country, in this state as well. And so I still hold on to the fact that the time is always right to do what is right, but do we have the courage that it takes to do what is right? Are we willing to change the culture within our own spheres of influence, within our own families, within our workplace, within our educational and other systems to do what is right? Because to stand up and to stand alone is not an easy task. There was a professor at Utah Valley, Dr. Kate Kirkham. Years ago, I read some of her work in diversity training, and she talked about the phenomena of standing alone and what that entailed for someone who was white, to stand alone when they heard the jokes, to stand alone and to stand up and push back when they saw inequities in place. And for many, to stand alone may mean losing rights and privileges at work or losing a job. It may mean losing that invitation to the country club or the party, or the membership to the country club or party, or even be disowned by your own family members. So many people didn't stand up and stand alone. But that is still our challenge today, because as we stand, we recognize that we're really not standing alone, that there are other people that are standing with us who believe in justice and equity and inclusion. There are people standing with us willing to fight, like I said, in these different institutions of government. And in thinking about, whenever I share, I always try to look at what that call to action looks like. You know, what am I willing to do? You know, what are you willing to do? What will I call on you to do with me? And so first and foremost, and we look at these things when we talk about any kind of change, we have to be true to ourselves. We have to do that self-reflection. Where am I? What do I believe? Why do I believe that? Most recently, I had the opportunity to travel back to my home state into Virginia to participate in the 400th year commemoration of the first Africans landing on this soil in Virginia. And in standing there and in being there, again, all kinds of emotions and feelings came over me. And most of it was around disappointment that even though we're commemorating this time 400 years after we've landed, we're still grappling with some of those same issues that we've grappled with during this time. Writer Nicole Hannah-Jones did a spectacular, I think, Pulitzer Prize winning project 1619, and looking at our story, our history over these 400 years to present, and with thousands of scholarly references and inferences and quotes and material, academicians across the country still challenge the validity of this information. So we're not willing to, come to grips with the fact and the reality about our experience in this country, then it's really hard for us to move forward. And that's where we are now. That's why I believe we see the clashes in the street, people protesting again for the same rights that we have for these 400 years and over 150 years since the last of those enslaved were set free in Galveston, Texas in 1865, over 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And with that, having led our Juneteenth effort in the state of Utah for the last 31 years, when we look at 1865 and now 2020, we're again at that crossroads of hope and fear, where we act on the hope that we have, that we can be better, we can do better, America can be better, Utah can be better, our institutions can be better. Will we act on the fear or the hope that we can do better and chart that path forward? And so that's my charge to all of us as we listen, wherever you are, in whatever place you are, starting with self, then engaging with family in these meaningful and challenging discussions, and then taking that out to the public sphere, as well as that private sphere where we work, where we go to school, where we have influence. As president of the Ogden NAACP, and NAACP was established in 1909. And so over 100 years, we've been fighting this fight for justice and equality, and still have to do that work today. But I wonder how many of us have ever thought about being members of the NAACP and thinking, oh, that's just for them, it's not for us. Or if you're members, are you engaged in that work of freedom, justice, and equality, that social justice work that's so needed today? And, are you challenging, or would you challenge your workplace to join, to be corporate members, to talk about these issues, to make sure that we provide an atmosphere that's free from discrimination, and look at policies and practices that are there and try to work to right the wrongs that have been done? Because the reality is the systems that are in place were deliberately put there for the most part. Of course, there were some that came about accidentally and unbeknownst, but for the most part, these systems were instituted by government to do just what they did, separate and unequal, to keep certain people out of power and other people to maintain the power. And so it's going to take all of us to have the courage to act and to do what is right when we have the opportunity, and we know that it's always the right time to do what is right. And being with you today, my biggest hope is just to be able to spend a little time talking with you and not you listening to me. So with that, I'll stop for a while, and hopefully we'll get into an opportunity to just exchange ideas and as we work together on that path forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and unmute.